Next question comes from Abdul Karim Hekmat.
My question is addressed to Scott Morrison. You said recently that asylum seekers coming by boat could spend at least 5 years on a row under a coalition government. As a refugee from Afghanistan, I have friends who spent years on a row under your government and still have not recovered from long-term incarceration. Can you explain what would be the financial and human cost of people who spend on a row for years?
Scott Morrison.
Well, thanks for the question. First of all, let me clarify. What I did last week was clarify what the government's policy was. I mean, the government has adopted a policy following the release of the Houston report that there would be a no advantage principle that would apply to how long people would stay on Naaru. That's what the Houston panel recommended. Now, the government hasn't explained to people what that means, and they couldn't even explain it to Senate estimates the other week. Now,
there is a bit of a problem with the High Court here, isn't there? If they do explain it, the High Court may overturn the right to do it.
There's not actually, because Naaru is not a place of detention under the Migration Act, and as a result, it comes under a different set of arrangements. So what I was simply trying to do was codify what that government policy meant, because if you are going to have such a policy, it has to mean something. Now, I've been in Malaysia, I've been in Indonesia, I've spoken to asylum seekers all around the country and in detention centres overseas. Now, the average waiting time in Malaysia, confirmed again to me most recently, is around about 5 years. So if the government's going to tell the Australian people that there will be a no advantage principle, then they should say and be honest what that is.
Okay,
that's around about 5 years.
Morrison, can I get you to clear this up for us? Is it now coalition policy, were you in government, to keep people in these detention centres offshore for a minimum of 5 years?
Well, I never said a minimum of 5 years. That's just not my words, Tony. So
that's why I'm asking you to clarify it.
Well, I shouldn't have to clarify something that's been misrepresented by others.
Well, is it going to be your policy to keep people for 5 years or more?
We adopt the no advantage principle, and the no advantage principle should be communicated like this to the region, that based on the waiting time in places like Malaysia, then if you get on a boat and come to Australia, then you should expect to wait around about 5 years. Now, that's what I mean. That's what the government should be saying if that's indeed their policy.
So is it your policy?
Well, I've just said the no advantage principle will apply under a coalition government, and if people come by boat
and you put
to
the
Australia,
5 year,
well,
I'd like to just clarify it because you still haven't quite said it. It does sound like you're saying under a coalition government, minimum 5 years.
No, I'm not saying that, Tony. You keep saying that, but I'm not actually saying it. I'm saying that the no advantage principle says that you should stay and wait about as long as the time it takes in other places in the region. Now, in Malaysia, it's 5 years. So my message to the region is you can expect to wait around about 5 years. Now, as others may well understand...
Well, that sounds like a policy to me.
Well, Tony, we actually have a lot of policies in this area. It's the government.
I'm just trying to clarify. The question's got his hands up again. Let's go to the question.
But it's not a minimum of. The ultimate discretion remains with the Minister at the end of the day under 46A of the Migration Act.
Let's go to the question.
That's the policy.
And the question of 5 years has been widely reported in the media that you said 5 years minimum, at least refugee could spend 5 years in detention. And while the UNHCR actually reject that there's no average time that people could spend either in Malaysia or somewhere else. And I just wonder how you come up with 5 years that is rejected by UNHCR itself.
Well, the 5 years originally came from my discussions with refugees and asylum seekers living in Malaysia, Karen and Chin refugees living in Kuala Lumpur. Now, these timeframes have been confirmed again to me most recently up in Indonesia, talking about what the processing times in Indonesia, which from the UNHCR are about 2 to 3 years. In Malaysia, it can be up to 3 times that. Now, the government can't say we're going to apply a no advantage principle and then not tell you what it is. I don't understand what the point of having a policy like that is,
all right,
if you're not going to deliver the message to the region.
Let's go to the representative of the government. Are you comfortable with this no advantage test if it means what Scott Morrison says it means, which is an average of 5 years or a minimum of 5 years? 5 years anyway being the time that people, he says, stay in these offshore areas before they are actually able to become refugees.
Well, Tony, the 5 year figure has come from Scott Morrison, and he's given us some of the reasoning behind it, but it's basically a figure that he's come up with. I understand why the question is asking that question, because that was the impression that Mr Morrison's comments gave to people. I think the question on how long it is that people will be detained will be a matter which will have to be worked through pretty carefully. It will require assembling and understanding the data in terms of location stays, looking at the cohorts of people that have been detained, and done in the context of making sure that the recommendations of the Houston review that the government has accepted are put into place. And that's what we're committed to doing. Now, the coalition's
so you're personally completely comfortable with the no disadvantage test that keeps
no
people
advantage
offshore?
Test.
Sorry, no advantage test, I beg your pardon. That keeps people in offshore detention centres for very long periods of time, arguably years.
Tony, there is nothing comforting about this issue, including the fact that people may be detained for significant periods of time in Naaru or in Malaysia or anywhere else. So I take no comfort from it at all.
No one does.
But what I do take comfort from is having a policy position in place that is logical, that is humane, that is attempting to deal with the key issue that we face in terms of the arrival of people here, and that is people risking their lives on boats and the people smuggling trade that is fueling those dangers.